Welcome to the 3 great days, the Triduum, the most sacred days in our time together as Christians. We mark time all different sorts of ways, but in our spiritual life, we key it often to the life of Jesus. And this week is what we call our Holy Week, and these 3 days are the most holy of the Holy Week. And we look tonight at the commemoration of Jesus washing the feet of the disciples and Jesus instituting the Lord's Supper. Tomorrow we look at his trial and crucifixion and death. And then on Saturday we watch and we wait, and we know for certain that love is stronger than death and that resurrection will find expression in the midst of this story. These are hard stories to tell because they're so real. I have never been able to understand how we can come together as a group like this and look at these stories of great sadness and suffering and not find in them also our own life stories as well. These are true stories because we know them. We've lived them. Who here has not known betrayal, disappointment in personal relationships or in community? Who here has not found solace at this table, even in the most difficult times? Who here has not suffered in watching the suffering of a friend going through illness or death, prolonged or sudden? Who here has not longed for resurrection and new life? We come together to look at these stories, sad or painful as they are, because there are stories and they're true. And the sadness and the grief is real, but the resurrection and the new life are also real. I've often felt that the depth of our sadness or grief is an indicator of our capacity for resurrection and joy. So tonight, we look at what we've come to call Jesus' Last Supper, or the Lord's Supper. Last Supper, it's an interesting phrase. You know, it was a phrase that came into common parlance in San Francisco in the 1980s and 90s, when there were so many people living with terminal illness, AIDS, and there was a certain trajectory, a predictability to someone's illness and death, that it was not uncommon to have Last Suppers, intentional gatherings with someone close to the time of their death. Sometimes they might be involved in the timing of their death, sometimes not. But nevertheless, we had these intentional gatherings, and I know you had them here too, in this city. Margaret Cho made a movie about it, actually a pretty terrible movie. But I thought the remarkable thing was that someone made a movie about it at all, acknowledging the poignancy of gathering together with people when you know things are about to change and saying to one another what needs to be said in order for progress, a letting go, a kind of resurrection to take place. It wasn't always possible, but when it did happen, it was always powerful. And that's how I know this story was powerful. Jesus understood that things were about to change. He'd done a lot of things with this group of people. They'd worked together and achieved many of their goals, many exciting life transformations, changes in society were visible as a result of their work together. You could measure the success of a change movement by the amount of resistance it engenders. And Jesus, according to John's gospel, the one we've been using this season, was going to be arrested certainly, and particularly for his crime of raising Lazarus. This is what the religious authorities decided was the final straw. He's giving too much hope that the way things are can be changed. And so Jesus' arrest was certain. He knew. and those surrounding him probably knew. But sometimes they would perhaps do what we do too, allow themselves to acknowledge, and other times pretend it wasn't happening at all. Jesus was very focused. He comes into his own in this week, and we see why he was a great leader. He called them together, and it's clear to him that they need to do a reset, and that it will no longer be the way it had been. But he does not leave them without resources for this time of change that is about to take place. He says to them, I'm going to show you something that will be really valuable to you as you renew your community after I am no longer with you. And then Jesus models this servant leadership. Jesus doesn't call them together to say, you know what, I'm leaving. Let's make a big fuss about me. Jesus calls them together to say, look, and one by one, in a very intimate way, he washes their feet. And this would have been as intimate then as it sounds today. If you don't think it's intimate, I know how hard it was to find 12 people who were willing, with warning, to come and allow their feet to be washed in public by the clergy. There are many ways we could have reenacted this ceremony. That's how we're doing it this year. 12 representatives of the congregation whose feet are being washed by the clergy. And even the clergy said, well, I think it's rather easier to wash someone's feet in public than to allow my own feet to be washed. That's true. So wherever in this story you find resistance, or you think, I don't think I'd like to do that, push yourself there and ask yourself why. Jesus is very clear. Leadership means equality, an egalitarian model where no one is greater than another, and that as you reset your community, experimenting with non-hierarchical manners of organizing yourselves, this is Jesus to the disciples, but could be to us. This is how you will find what you need to do in order to achieve what you long for. Jesus knew that what they had achieved together was far too important to be personality dependent on him or on any other charismatic personality. He pushed them to find the place where they could feel equal to each other, not identical to one another, but equal to each other, appreciate each other. And so he had them engage in this ritual which still has meaning to us 2,000 years later. Taking off their here, people will take off their shoes and socks, and others who are leaders of a sort will wash their feet. And you have a role too. Place yourself in the stead of the person whose foot is being washed, or place yourself in the stead of the person who's washing. And imagine what it is about leadership and spirituality that Jesus is speaking to you and to us tonight. It is a very intimate gesture. You can't wash someone's feet and never forget it. Anyone who's ever been reliant upon another person during illness and had to surrender certain notions of modesty in order to survive, do you know what I'm talking about? You understand how intimate this is. Jesus said, at the core of our movement, if it stands for anything, it stands for this: leaders who are servants to one another. And he said that, conscious that it was an imperfect group that he was working with. I'm sure you caught the allusion to Judas when he said, and not all of you are being perfectly honest here. That's what community is like. Not everyone's always going to be operating at 100% all the time. Jesus understood that and said to them, still persist. Remember, no one is better than another. No one is higher than another. You equally contribute to this movement, and that's what makes it strong. It's not about me. It's not about her or him. It's about us. And so Jesus washed their feet. And then he did something else. He shared with them a meal they were accustomed to sharing, maybe all the time, but it took on new meaning that night. During the Passover, according to some, their liberation meal, when they gathered at least once a year as a people to remind themselves where they had come from in slavery and oppression and where they were going to liberation and freedom. In the midst of that meal, he gave a sign to them. This bread, it's my body. This cup, it's my blood. Another intimate gesture, another kind of identification, another pledge to them that he would always be with them, if not in body and spirit, and present to them in the table. For Jesus, resurrection was not the goal, it was the process. And Eucharist and servant leadership were the strategies that made it possible. Not only are you all equal, but whenever you gather, Jesus said to them, break bread and share a cup and know that I'm with you. I won't be with you in the same way after this week, but you still have work to do. Jesus offers to us this model as we as a whole community go through a reset, a communal resurrection. Jesus models the kind of leadership we can expect from our leaders and from one another. And Jesus also reminds us of the importance of the centrality of the table in our spiritual lives. There is nothing we can't go through without the presence of Christ to sustain us, as represented by the bread and the cup, especially if we make it a discipline to gather here every week, no matter what, even if we're mad at each other, or even if someone has betrayed us or disappointed us. I wouldn't dream of missing my weekly reunion moment with Jesus, with the saints and angels, and with all my brothers and sisters, perfect and imperfect, because we receive here at this table what we need most in order to experience resurrection. Tonight, I invite you to either go back to that upper room in your mind, or bring that upper room into this place, whichever works better for you. Is there someone who has betrayed you that you need to seek reconciliation with? Maybe you can't do it tonight, but it could begin tonight by acknowledging it. There's no safer place in the world to acknowledge to yourself if there's a reconciliation that you need, that they need, that needs, the world needs, that love needs. Can you pledge tonight together to the kind of leadership that we're about to experiment with foot washing? And will you agree to continue to meet in this place as often as possible for Jesus' encouragement as we go together on the road to resurrection? Amen.